Welcome to the Ricky Matthews Show from the Citizens Bank Studio. Hope you're having a great day as we continue to celebrate so many amazing people across the state of Mississippi. So many great conversations. And today is a special show because we're going to reflect a little bit. Matt McDonnell, the longtime executive director, the lead at the Mississippi Coast Coliseum and Convention Center, has announced his retirement. And so when he and I chatted recently, I actually saw him at the Vicari auctions during cruising the coast. We committed to getting together and reflecting a little bit, reflecting on the past, reflecting on the future, actually, as it relates to the Coliseum and Convention Center. I've been looking forward to this conversation. And, it's interesting, too, that we have Kyle with us because Kyle has worked with Matt along the way. And, Kyle, I'll just tell you, that at any point during this conversation, you want to add your 10 cents or ask a question, feel free to do it. So without any further ado, let me welcome my friend Matt McDonnell back to the Ricky Matthews Show. Matt, how you doing, my friend?
Ricky, I'm doing great, man. Business is good. We've just finished a very successful run with Disney on Ice, and we're going to be playing hockey and ice skating, and college basketball is coming back in December, and we have a lot of shows on the board, on sale for the first quarter in 2026, and we'll be announcing more shows for the second and third and fourth quarter of 2026 as we get towards the end of the year and early into next year.
Listen, as I got to see up close and personal, I really appreciate you inviting me and letting me see kind of a behind the scenes look at things when the Judds played. And one of the things that I really got to really take in is the way you're able to make that transition from a world-class, musical event to hockey in a very short period of time. But that's a little bit of, certainly I'm sure it's mass hysteria if you were to watch it take place, but it's a well-honed machine, isn't it?
It really is. We have a really good core group of people here that understand the logistics. How much labor, how much equipment, all these things that you have to know in order to be able to do it in a time efficient way. And we've been doing it a long time. I mean, hockey's been here since the mid '90s, and we don't miss a show. If we have an opportunity to book a touring event, Biloxi's not the biggest market on anybody's tour by any means. So we make sure that we do everything we can to get as many of those touring dates to stop here at the Coliseum. And in order to do that, sometimes you have to put your staff into a bind, so to speak, to where they know they've got a very difficult turn, but they're able to make it, and we keep the shows coming.
Listen, let's take a step backward. Before we're done with today's show, we're going to talk about some high points during your career there, and the aftermath of Katrina. There's a lot to talk about. I also want to talk about the future. Mobile's building a new, a very significant arena, and they have put their stake in the dirt from a competitive point of view here in the Gulf South. And I want to talk to you about where the Coast Coliseum should be going as it relates to that. And what do you see in terms of, the future? Because disruption, as Ashley Edwards and I talked about on a recent show, disruption is all around us. The competitive situation is very significant, not just in your industry, but just in general. When you think about AI and advanced manufacturing, all the things that we're facing, there's a lot to talk about. But let's take a step back. As you and I were chatting before the show started, the legislation creating the Coast Coliseum was 1968, man. That's a long time ago, man. And I know that it didn't start getting built till a few years after that. It was finished in 1977. But that's an old facility, but it's been a facility that's been invested in along the way that's kind of stood the test of time to a large extent. It's been a storied history, hasn't it?
It really has. I was thinking back about all the different things that have happened here over 48 years, and the building's still going to go on. It's going to go on as long as people will keep coming to it. But it's going to need some serious renovations, or a new facility is going to have to be built. But we'll get there. We'll get there before the end of this show. But when I was a freshman, just about to start college, I had a summer job where I traveled from Mobile 3 days a week to bring plumbing supply parts. So I kind of watched the building get finished. It was well underway when I started bringing parts and pieces here, but to watch it finish out and then open up in November of 1977 was very unique for me, with me not having any idea or any thought about ever moving to Biloxi and taking over and running the building.
Pretty amazing. Hey, listen, I was at that Charlie Pride concert. That was a significant moment, and you got a chance to feel the energy in the room. Did you have a chance to go to that?
No, I didn't attend the opening show. I attended many shows here, though, when the building first opened, 78, 79. I mean, I can remember seeing Jimmy Buffett here. I can remember seeing Bad Company, Styx, the Police. I mean, I saw a lot of shows in the early days of the facility as a fan, driving over from Mobile, because this building, when it opened, it affected the amount of content that was coming into Mobile. And it really has since it's opened. And now Mobile's finally doing something to stem that tide. That the building has had many, many, many major tours that have stopped here along the way. And if you recall, New Orleans really never had a major arena. They had Louis Armstrong, which was a 6,500, maybe 7,000 seat venue. They built the Superdome in 75, which was 2 years before this building opened. But the Superdome was so big and cavernous that it was difficult for touring events to really make it work in the dome. And so Biloxi had kind of the run of the Gulf Coast from the day it opened until, I guess, 2000, when Smoothie King opened.
Yeah, very, very, very interesting time. Looking back, as I was reflecting on the talk today, I did a lot of concerts in the early days. Some that stand out to me: Foghat, I remember that one. ELO. I mean, ELO, that was a great concert because they had the spaceship that opened up and all the special.
I've seen pictures of the spaceship and how it lowered in and then it lifted up and the band was there playing. I mean, that was very simple production as what we know today. But back then, that was just mind boggling, and yeah. It really kind of started the foundation for some of the crazy theatrics that we've had here over the years.
Yeah, again, what comes to mind is Elton John and, of course, Cher. Speaking of theatrics, but a lot of history, man. So much history. It's quite an incredible ride that facility has gone through. And then when it's sexy to think about the concerts and all the big acts and all of that, but then you start to really get your head around the convention center part of what the Coliseum does and what the convention center did, adding on to the convention center after Katrina and all that. That convention piece of this has been a staple to the economy of Coastal Mississippi over all these years, hasn't it?
It really has. I mean, you go back and you think about all the smaller hotels before there were casino properties, and those hotels thrived on what we did here. Whether it was state conventions, regional conventions, local gatherings that still attracted people from a driving distance. I mean, those all were significant economic generators for folks along the Gulf Coast for years and years and years. And, you talked about things would slow down during or after Labor Day, and then things wouldn't really start picking up until we got into the springtime. So a lot of businesses depended on what was happening here, and we were able to fill some of those voids even during the off season.
I think it's important to point out, we did this in our early shows, and from time to time we've talked about it. But in order for the Coliseum to survive, it's not getting it doesn't have a sugar daddy. It's not got, somebody's not writing you a check every month. There's some debt service that happens, but at the end of the day, you're a entrepreneurial business. You live and die on your revenue and your expenses, and that is the reality of the Coliseum, isn't it?
It is, and sometimes people question, well, why can't you bring this show or that show? And it's like, we go and try to get every piece of business that we can get, and it boils down to, if the doors aren't open, we're not making money. You got to turn the lights on. You got to open the doors. You got to get people here, and they're going to spend money on food and beverage. They're going to spend money on merchandise. They're going to spend money to park, and all of those revenue streams are all a part of what it takes to operate this building on an annual basis. And in the course of my 40-year career here, I can remember, it only took us $2.5–3 million a year to operate. It now takes us $6 million a year to operate. And it's not in salaries as much as it is in insurance and utilities and maintenance and repair costs. And yes, we do put a lot of money back into trying to maintain this facility. But the older it gets, the more maintenance that it needs. And at some point, that maintenance really becomes a mountain to climb when you're talking about having to get the building really in a competitive shape compared to what the other markets have.
We're visiting with Matt McDonnell from the Coast Coliseum. We'll see you after this break. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. We're visiting with Matt McDonnell, who has announced his retirement. He's the director of the Mississippi Coast Coliseum Convention Center. He's been a regular on this show. And my sense is he's not going to ride off into the sunset. We're going to see some other iteration of him because he's been in public life for so long. He's served on the board of aldermen in Ocean Springs along the way, lives in Gulfport these days. But it will be interesting to watch you, Matt, to see where you go from here. But 40 years, when you said it in the first segment, it just kind of blew my mind temporarily. You seem to have always been there, as the sort of Bill Holmes number 2 all those years, and then as a lead dog, since then. Isn't it amazing how time flies?
It really is. I was reflecting on that actually this morning, the fact that there's been 2 individuals that have been here for 48 years. Bill started when the building opened in 77, and he worked till 2015. I came in 1986, and then I guess I'll finish up sometime in 2026, but it's really remarkable that you have that kind of consistency. A lot of buildings don't have that. The building managers move around. Some of the markets have private management companies, and they'll rotate managers in and out. But I think the level of consistency is important because there are relationships that get established. There's protocols that have to be understood, how things operate. Politics here is different than politics in Louisiana and Alabama. So you have to really be on top of your game. And I think the consistency of having Bill here for 38 years and me here for 40 years with a lot of overlap there has made the consistency a lot easier.
What an amazing story when you think about it. It really is to have had such long focused management. Again, it's got to be run like a business. So innovation is key. I often think, and we'll get to this in a second, about the investments you got to make. Not just after Hurricane Katrina, but during the pandemic, the money that you spent in infrastructure there that would enable some of the big acts to come there. We'll come back to that in just a second. But it is an amazing story of longevity and consistency. For people who don't know this, why don't you give them a sense of the board of governance, the board of trustees, who appoints them? You've seen so many characters come and go on that board of trustees over the years, but tell us about that for people who don't understand how this works.
The Coliseum was set up, as you mentioned earlier, in 1968 by an act of the state legislature. And then the commissioners were appointed by the governor and the Harrison County Board of Supervisors. And the Board of Supervisors only had 2 appointments, and the governor had 3. So it was a 5-member board. And throughout the years, we have had some phenomenal board members. When I go back and think about Yankee Bahanovich and Gus Stevens and Lucy Marion Roberts, Mitch Salome, Walter Blessey, I mean, you've had several politicians that have made it to the board before they got elected, and we've had some that made it to the board after they retired from politics. I mean, I can think about Bobby Eleuteris, C.T. Switzer. Fofo Gillich was on our board before he became mayor. Beverly Martin was on our board before she became a member of the Harrison County Board of Supervisors. So you think about just so many quality people. I mean, I go back to the days of Dave Dennis and Gerald Piltz and Dr. Doug Lanier. And those were people that were professionals in their own right, but they brought that sense of knowledge and credibility and consistency to our board. And that's what made our board, to me, one of the best boards in the entire state of Mississippi.
You know, it is interesting to hear all those names, all of them leaving terrific legacies, you know, always giving back either in public life or in the private sector, giving back in one way or the other. I mean, Dave Dennis, you mentioned him. He's a dear friend. I happen to know quite well the number of irons he keeps in the fire. He just always is giving back. But these are, you know, Lucia Marion, she's such a good friend. I mean, Lucia Marion served on my Knight Foundation Citizens Advisory Committee for many, many years. And we were close up until she passed away, unfortunately. But gosh, what a great board. And here's the thing about them. They all understand strategic, you know, the decisions you make today. One of the great things about being someone like Bill's long tenure there, your long tenure there, and I used to say this about me at the Sun Herald, was that I was making decisions that I expected I was going to live with 10 years from now. So when you're in that situation, it makes a difference in how you make decisions. If you're there for the short term, you're really not thinking about 10 years from now. You're just really thinking about how do I get and make success for the next couple of years. It makes a big difference, doesn't it?
Well, and that was what's made our board so unique and really why it works the way it does is the fact that these board members rotate off. Some of them do as long as 16 years. I know Mitch Shalom, Lucy Marion Roberts, that they both did 16 years in office. Some only do one term and then they get off. So when you have that kind of transition, it really takes the leadership coming from the executive director, whether it was Bill or myself, to where we kind of make sure the board understands short-term decisions normally lend itself to long-term ramifications. And I can go back and remember Bobby Mahoney being the deciding vote to bring hockey here in 1996. Bobby looked like a genius for about 4 years. He really did.
Yeah, there's so many incredible decisions. You know, I think back at my time at the Sun Herald, and then more recently, just watching the Coast Coliseum Convention Center do what it does, and I don't remember ever any big periods of disruption. You know, sometimes you get boards just have a way of you know, you were served on the board of aldermen. You know how that works. You can. All it takes is one alderman and one new alderman. It can throw everything out of kilter. But I just don't remember a time when, and this is during enormous change. You think about disruption that Katrina brought or competition brought or whatever, you name it. There just hasn't been moments of big disruption. I'm not saying there wasn't moments where there was disagreement on the board of trustees or whatever. That's normal, okay? But I'm talking about headline making disruption. You've been very lucky in that regard.
No, we kind of take care of business, and our board, no matter who's been on that board, understands what the mission of this building is and what it's supposed to do. And that's really the key. And that's why I put our board up against anybody. I mean, I've seen other boards here on the coast where there's been turmoil and friction and different agendas trying to be worked. And it's like, that just normally doesn't end well, and it certainly doesn't work very well. So thank goodness that the powers to be have appointed absolute high-quality candidates to be members of the Mississippi Coast Coliseum Commission.
And listen, when you got someone who brings years of whether it's in governmental experience or whether it's, you know, private sector experience, I mean, a board is supposed. I remember having a conversation with John Harrison once about his board of directors at his bank. And the way he looked at his board of directors is when a new board member was to come in, he looked at specifically what can they bring to the table that's really going to help us raise our bar? How can I learn from that person? But that's true, isn't it? I mean, you got diverse points of view, you got spirited discussion, but it's all being drawn from that discussion, drawn from experience of different points of view, but different points of experience. And it makes for a better outcome at the end of the day, doesn't it?
It really does, but the big difference in how John Harrison acquired board members and how we acquire board members is that ours are all appointed by elected officials, and sometimes the consistency in the makeup of elected boards are way different than the consistency of an appointed board. And we're just blessed and very fortunate that over the years, those elected officials really appointed top-notch, high-quality people to this board. Maybe it was a reputation that this board has always had, or that this building has always had. We've really not been controversial. We've really not gotten into anything to where there was division amongst the community over things we were doing. I mean, we had a few bumps in the road when we did a Marilyn Manson show years ago, and some of the religious community got up in arms, but we had to follow what the laws were, and freedom of speech is still freedom of speech. And, we lived through that, and we've lived through spring break when it created a lot of angst for the city of Biloxi. We've lived through oil spills. Katrina put an interruption to us for sure. We were down for almost 2 years before we got things rolling again. Now, while we did business hit and miss for a year after Katrina, it really took a couple of years to get everything back to where we wanted it and how we had to operate as efficiently as we could. But other than the storm interruptions, I would say this building has run pretty seamlessly for 48 years.
And we're actually going to pick it up from right there and talk a little bit more about Katrina when we get back on the other side. But big decisions had to be made. As you remember, I was leading the tourism recovery planning effort for the Governor's Commission. And one of the most important things we did, besides work very diligently to get land-based gaming, is to develop a strategic plan for that we could use. I remember giving many speeches with Governor Barber talking about the tourism industry and showing the numbers about where this is going. Is there going to be a there once all this happens? And once the private investment started to happen, Coliseum had big decisions to make about the convention center, but we rolled forward. We placed some big bets, and it all worked out really well. But I want to talk a little bit about those days after Katrina and what you faced when we continue our conversation with Matt McDonnell, who will be retiring after the first of the year. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show. We're visiting with Matt McDonnell. He's the leader. He runs the show at the Mississippi Coast Coliseum and Convention Center. When we went to break, we were mentioning Hurricane Katrina. And I was so aware because I had the honor of leading the tourism recovery effort, the planning effort for the Governor's Commission. And, man, there was so much to work through. There's no doubt about that. But one of the things that was really evident that we had to recover simultaneously on so many dimensions at the same time. And we needed it all, man. We needed hotels to open back up again. We needed convention center to open up. We needed the Coliseum to open up. We needed casinos to go inland gaming and get rebuilding rapidly. We needed the beach to get clean. One of the things we often said at our meetings was, getting the beach clean rapidly so that people, when they stood on the seawall and looked south, they didn't have to see the destruction behind them, and they could see the beauty of this place still. And that would really remind us why we have to push forward. It was a very inspiring time, to be honest with you. The Coliseum, man, I mean, for people who didn't know this or weren't here, give them a sense of the day after the storm, what you guys were facing.
Well, I was able to get back here the day of the storm. I got back here on that Monday. I'd evacuated Mobile to take my wife and my 2 young children, because we live down on Lover's Lane, and most of the houses on Lover's Lane got destroyed. So there was no option but to evacuate for us. And so I got back here that Monday afternoon. The storm, I think, had subsided about 2:00 that day. The winds had kind of died down a little bit. And so I was able to get in, and the devastation was just beyond my imagination completely. And I remember having to detour because the bridge on Pops Ferry was damaged. I went back around to I-110 and I was able to get down, but Highway 90 was damaged. And finally, I got on Pass Road, and there were so many things that just didn't look normal. And finally, when I turned down Beauvoir Road, there was a embankment from all the debris at the railroad tracks, and I literally could not cross and go south past those tracks. So I parked and got out and walked and found Bill, and Bill looked like a refugee that'd been on a deserted island for several years when I found him. He was shell shocked because he had stayed at the building, and we knew then that we had a long, long road to recover. But the really disturbing part was we really didn't know if the community was behind us in the recovery because of the lack of information on insurance and money and how we were going to rebuild this and where were the funds going to come from and how much damage do we truly sustain. And it took months and months and months and months to figure that out. But I am very thankful that the powers to be did the right thing and went ahead and built that convention center, because that extra box that we now operate has been a game changer for us and for the community as well.
It was a big deal. I mean, I'm sure, Bill has told the story on the show before about as they watched that water rise. And I mean, you had a number of people there, didn't you?
He had, I want to say about 50 that had wandered. Some of them had wandered in off the highway. He had Jim Cantori and the Weather Channel guys here, but they deserted us for higher ground at the naval home. But unfortunately, it wasn't high enough because they lost all their equipment. Where if they'd have just pulled their vehicles up on our exit ramps, they'd have been fine. But they went for hot meals and AC.
Yeah, that story. I mean, they went from being the Weather Channel to helping to save people during that storm. It was that story's been well told. But Bill talks about what he was witnessing and how he, like so many of us who experienced that storm, realized that if we're getting this here, that means that the coast we love is virtually getting wiped off the face of the earth, and it was going to take all of us digging in and doing everything in our power to get ourselves out of that mess. But it was it took a little time, didn't it, to get reoriented and to say, okay, here's what we've got to do.
It really did. And I mean, first thing we had to do was figure out all the shows that we had on sale, and we knew none of those were going to play, and so we had to figure out how to refund money. And back then, your tickets were hard tickets, and so people's tickets got lost. And if you bought them on a credit card, we could go back and track that. But there was still a large number of tickets that we were never able to refund because we could never account for who owned them or what they paid for them. It was so bizarre of a situation that, things would be easier now because of technology, trying to put pieces back together. But back then it was just survival at its purest, rawest form. But we had a lot of partners. We had a lot of friends. We had a lot of people that helped us. And with the vision of the county to let us go ahead and build that expansion, with Bill's absolute steadfast desire not to fail, we were able to get insurance settled. We were able to get help from FEMA. We even built FEMA a headquarters that they still operate in to this day that helped us get at least some positive cash flow where we could keep the doors open and keep payroll and keep things moving. Even though it was slow, we were able to keep things moving.
What a dynamic time. And of course, you invested. You continue to invest heavily over all these years to make the facility competitive. I mentioned at the beginning of the show, Ashley Edwards and I did a show about the blue economy and a TED Talk that he did recently, and we talked a lot about disruption. A lot of the coast economy has been based on recovery dollars over the past 20 years. A lot of, billions in federal funds came in here. While we were worried and working on recovery, places like the Golden Triangle had over $11 billion of new investment of advanced manufacturing, and you name it. The Florida Panhandle has exploded. Places like Savannah has exploded. You think about where we are now, then we're needing to begin to shift and see the disruption that's in front of us as being just as significant as Katrina, except that we can't necessarily all see it. What was beautiful about Katrina was we could see it and we could get all together around that recovery effort. Ashley raises the point that there is exponential, very significant disruption on the horizon. In fact, it's happening as we speak around AI, et cetera. And that we've really got to begin to change our view here in coastal Mississippi to get away from a disaster disruption and start thinking more about economic disruption. You and I have talked about this before as it relates to you. You're seeing a lot of changes in your industry. We don't have a chance to really zero in, but you think about just competitive sites, like, for example, Mobile making the decision to implode their facility and build a new one. I think you mentioned before the show started, they'll probably get it done within 3 years. That's significant. We have to pay attention to things like that, don't we, Matt?
We do, because of the fact that competition is not going away. It's all driven by how much money that the artists can pull out from any given market. But the artists look at it a little bit more than just money. They look at guest experience. They look at how the fans get to interact with them from city to city, venue to venue. And the venues that are prepared to create even higher guest experiences are going to be the venues where these artists are going to want to play. I mean, the difference in playing in Mobile or Biloxi is 65 miles. So it's nothing in terms of a routing issue at all. 65 miles is just another hour on the road to get from point A to point B. But what we think we are going to see is that the different amenities that a new facility will offer will create those different fan experiences that the artists are going to want to be a part of. Therefore, shows will skip us and go into Mobile, or they'll play New Orleans and jump from New Orleans to Mobile, or Mobile to New Orleans. And that will happen starting in 27 and probably will last for at least a couple of years. Now, does that mean that this facility won't have business? Absolutely not. We've got a great market. We've got a lot of relationships that will still help us get business. It just means it's going to get tougher to get the business in the future than it is currently, and it may become more expensive.
Yeah, I've been thinking a lot about conversations that you and I have had before. This notion of, I was in New Orleans when they made a lot of the decisions about what they're going to do with the Superdome. And certainly, they made the decision to keep the Superdome. In fact, you may remember when I was at the Sun Herald, we were writing editorials saying, build it in Mississippi. We were really promoting that idea. I don't know how real that ever was, but at the end of the day, they invested dramatically after Katrina. I think $500 million or some ridiculous number. And that facility has turned out to be an incredible facility. I mean, it took a lot of money, but they have added to it. And then more recently, they spent even more money, on the new locker rooms and lots of new guest experiences, as you pointed out. And it's going to stand the test of time. I guess the question, and we'll start with this on the other side, are the bones there in the Mississippi Coast Coliseum to do the same thing, to make a commitment that we're going to, instead of embarking on a completely new road where we implode the Coliseum and build something new, are the bones there to do something like the Superdome did? When we come back on the other side, we're actually going to explore that thought as we, in this sort of final show. My sense is we'll have maybe one more show before Matt ultimately gets out of here. But Matt McDonnell is going to be retiring from the Mississippi Coast Coliseum and Convention Center, and we're reflecting as a result of his leadership over 40 years. We'll see you after this. Welcome back to the Ricky Matthews Show for the Citizens Bank Studio. We're visiting with Matt McDonnell, who has a long history, 40 years, being at the Coast Coliseum. And as he mentioned before the show started, he actually used to deliver supplies during the construction of the Mississippi Coast Coliseum. So he's watched the history evolve, and he's been there since the mid-1980s, and he's still there today. And it will be interesting to see what he does once he retires. My sense is he won't be able to walk away from public service in some way. That's for sure. Okay, when we went to break, though, are the bones there to do a Superdome type of renovation And I say renovation because it's not just they literally, as you know, from Katrina to where they are today, they have spent hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars on the Superdome, which I think is a great decision, incidentally, because it's downtown. It brings those people downtown. It's great for the city, and I think the Coliseum will serve the coast of Mississippi many, many years to come at this location, not some other location. But what's your thoughts about that?
Well, the Superdome is really a lot different type of facility. It's a sporting facility primarily that, seats 76, 80,000, whatever the number is. It's big. But the state of Louisiana has always been committed to keeping that building going. And that's really the key, is that they've got a sugar daddy. They've got somebody to bankroll those renovations. And, I've spoken many times up and down the coast about the fact that, markets like Lafayette, Louisiana, they've gone through a facelift. Birmingham, Alabama did one during COVID, spent $100 million facelifting a building that opened in 1975. Superdome opened in 75. I've forgotten how many different facelifts that they've had, how many renovations. Katrina was certainly the biggest, but they've had multiple renovations over their 50-year life cycle. Smoothie King has already had its first renovation, and they're about to undergo a second renovation where they can stay competitive and keep the NBA happy and have the quality of experiences that the NBA expects, along with the major artists that are going into New Orleans. Now Mobile's building a new building. The only really true facelift or renovation that we've had here happened after Katrina, and we did roughly $27 million worth of repairs and renovations to an older building. And since then, we continue to put money back into it. But when you're talking about the amount of money that would be required to do a full-blown renovation of this facility, I mean, it could be anywhere from $75 to $125 million. Now, are the bones good? I think the best answer to that question will be, we really need to get someone in here to do a comprehensive study to make that determination. You can talk about renovating and retrofitting and revitalizing an old facility all day long, but if you don't have the facts, the hard facts, the bones are capable of handling that, then you're really kind of throwing money out the window and hoping that it lands at the right places. We're in the process of doing that. We have applied for a grant through GCRF to pay for a company to come in and do just that kind of study. And the way they presented it to us is that there's no emotion in this deal. It's all math, and it's all done with science and everything else to determine, yes, this building is capable of being renovated. This is how much we estimate those renovations will cost. And the rule of thumb that these guys have always told me to follow is that if renovation costs come in at over 50% of what a new facility would cost to build, tear down and build a new facility.
Yeah, see, I was, as a CEO, was involved in massive change efforts for most of my career, involved in major corporate strategic planning efforts. And the way I would always talk about it would be that you can't go to where you want to go if you don't know where you are now. So doing that current analysis, it's not just the building, but it's processes, it's everything. It involves massive amount of change. So let's understand where we are now. And then let's look at all the potential bridges to a future that we begin to envision. It could be a new building, could be a renovated building, could be all of those things. But you let the facts guide you. You let objective analysis guide you. This is not an emotional exercise. It is a fact-based, numbers-based conversation. And we will, as a set of community, and then, by the way, you can use that information, that data that you'll get from that study, to begin to align people around what it is we need to do. At the same time, you start to look at the market and how the market's changing, what the competitive face of that it looks like, and what it means to you in your innovative entrepreneurial effort to be successful.
That'll be included in the study to examine what your competitive market is around you and how you have to be able to combat that and thrive in it. So we'll know by the springtime if we were successful with our application for GCRF funds. But in the meantime, we're going to continue to put money back into this facility and keep it going. We have no choice. It's the only facility we have. And I know we're running out of time, but I do want to leave this thought with the people of South Mississippi. Could you imagine not having this facility for the 48 years that you've had it, with all the memories, all the shows, all the graduations, all the Mardi Gras balls, all the first things that you ever did? Some of those things happen right here at this facility. Let's be smart. Let's make sure that we keep this facility hopping. I mean, hopping, active, proactive, and let's keep business coming to South Mississippi and creating economic impact for everyone.
Hey, thank you for spending time. But what we're going to do, we're going to spend one more time together before you get out of here to reflect even more. So we didn't even scratch the surface. It's been a pleasure to spend some time with you. Thank you, Matt.
Thanks, Ricky.
Yeah, you bet. Matt McDonnell from the Coast Coliseum Convention Center. Have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.